Your name, age, and your rank. Hey.
Good morning, Jack and Connor. Nice to be here. My name is Robert Jones. I'm a captain in the United States Naval Reserve, retired, and I'm 69 years old.
What was your military occupational specialty?
I was what's called a surface warfare officer, in charge of operations, navigation, cryptology, things of that nature.
That's neat. In the Navy, aren't there three kinds of those? There's submarine.
There's surface warfare, submarine warfare, and air.
That's right.
Air Corps.
That's right.
What was your military occupation? Sorry. How long did you serve?
Well, I went in actually I raised my hand in April of 1969 and ended up serving 31 years. So from 69 to the year 2000. I was on active duty for 3 years, from November of 69 until November of 72, and then was in several reserve units from 72 to 2000.
You said you were on the USS Barry. Was that the ship you were predominantly on, or were you only on that during your active years?
No, that was my reserve. In active duty, I was basically in Officer Candidate School in Newport, Rhode Island for 16 weeks. And then went to cryptology school and some other navigational operations training in Charleston. And then was assigned to tanker/oiler out of Little Creek, which is near Norfolk, Virginia.
Ah.
And was on that for about 18 months. And that's where I had my single Mediterranean deployment from May to August of 1971. Subsequent to that, I came back to the States and joined a service squadron in Norfolk for another 18 months, and then essentially was offered the opportunity to stay in the Navy, but I had to sign a 6-year contract. We had 3 small children at the time, and I opted to get off active duty and go into the reserves, and essentially worked with different reserve units up and down the East Coast. So the Barry, I was the executive officer from 1980 to 1982. The ship was stationed in Mayport, Florida, and for our 2 weeks active duty, we would go down. When I say we, there were 7 officers and about 52 enlisted men that I was in charge of, as the XO, and then 2 years from 1982 to 84 as the commanding officer. But we would go aboard and help them basically for our 2-week training duty. One of the most exciting times, we left Mayport and came up the East Coast and did what's called patrol duty off of Newark Airport. And you come Newark Airport. What it was, the assignment for destroyers back then was to be plane guards. That is, they would hang about 2,000 yards, that's 1 nautical mile, behind an aircraft carrier and pick up any downed pilots. This is during Vietnam. And so if a pilot tried to land an aircraft carrier and had to ditch before he made it, he'd go into the water and a destroyer could come and rescue him right away. So what we did is we circled off the coast of New Jersey and pretended that commercial jets that were landing in Newark Airport were landing on an aircraft carrier deck, and we'd get as close as we could. This is at night. We didn't do it during the day because we were well within the 3-mile navigational limit. But it was good training for us, and we enjoyed it. Ironically, the active duty commanding officer of the USS Barry was a native of Rutland, Vermont, and at the time I was working in Vermont, and our reserve unit was based out of Burlington, Vermont, so we became really good friends with the CO. If you ever watch the television program on CBS called NCIS, I don't know if you have.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
If you look in the background, when they're in the sort of the war room there, and out the window, that is the USS Barry, moored on the Anacostia River at the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. It's been decommissioned. It's a tour ship now, so people can just go aboard and visit it. So I enjoyed it. I only had 4 years with the Barry, but I was the last reserve commanding officer of the unit of the ship, before it was decommissioned and then became a tour ship.
Really? So, what inspired you to join the armed forces?
Basically, my father and my father-in-law. My father was in the Navy in World War II. My father-in-law was in the Army, and those two provided me the inspiration.
What did you do before you volunteered?
I was in college, in fact, in the fall of 1968, and none of you were around then, but Vietnam was at its height, and I got a letter from the Army that said, congratulations on your upcoming graduation in June of 1969. We look forward to seeing you in Fort Benning, Georgia. And I read the letter and I said, well, I'm not sure I really want to go into the Army. I knew that I would be serving my country. I just opted to go look at other options. And so I applied for the Navy Officer Candidate School and was accepted. And that really took a year. That was November of '68 that I got the letter, and I didn't get into the OCS program until November of '69, after graduating from college.
So what do you think was the most important experience you had throughout your around 30 years of service?
Well, you know, in today's political climate, I thought about that in terms of some key words for me: integrity, honor, discipline, attention to detail, service, duty, country, all these words that are, in my opinion, sort of bandied about now by some of our political candidates. But these are things that back as a young 22, 24-year-old, I never really thought about too much. I just did my job and continued to serve. But I think that, more than anything else, an appreciation for my fellow man and woman, and service to country and duty are things that really were instilled in me over my 30-year career.
How did your service in the military affect your life, today?
Well, as I said a few minutes ago, I'd like to think that I've done a good job in my civilian life in terms of the jobs that I've held, the family that I've raised. And I think giving back to community is important, whether it is through uniformed military services like the Army, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, Air Force, or as is, I believe, still available today, to the Peace Corps, to AmeriCorps, Habitat for Humanity. Here in this town, we have people that give of their time and talent to serve in various roles in town and other office duties. And I think that's important. I think that's an obligation as an American citizen that we, I don't say we have to, but to me it's important that an individual give back to the community as a U.S. citizen.
So what kind of advice would you look to give someone looking to volunteer today?
You know, I would look to all those different options. Clearly the Boy Scouts of America have all kinds of different opportunities to help in the community, as do the Girl Scouts and other youth groups. I think for a young man or woman now who is graduating from high school, there are a lot of different options. The federal government has managed to pump a lot of money into educational programs to provide scholarships and things of that nature. But sometimes young people aren't always ready for a 2 or 4 year or longer stint in an educational environment. You know, they get to the point where after, let's see, age 6, so 10 to 12 years in school, they're restless. And so I encourage them to look to other opportunities, whether it's the military service or, as I mentioned, other kinds of volunteer opportunities, or as some kids do that I know, they take a couple years off. They travel, they try and get some life experience. They may then go back to college. There are a lot of advantages to joining up with the military through what's called the ROTC program, Reserve Officer Training Corps. Some schools have junior ROTC programs, for example. I think here in Cape Ann, Gloucester has a program at the high school. I think as one grows and matures, it's just, you know, keeping your eyes open and looking for different opportunities to help each other. And in the long run, I think that really means helping oneself. I mean, when one gives to others and volunteers their time and their talent and their service, I think everybody wins, not the least of which is the person that's giving that. So that's the kind of advice I think I would give to I did give to my children who are now grown, but I would give to our grandchildren as well. It may sound a little hokey and old school, but that's what I believe in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other anecdotes, any other stories, any other memorable experiences you have?
You know, I was talking about this with my wife last night, and because I had not a sleepless night, but tossed and turned last night, and it reminded me of, I can visualize it. It was July of 1971, and so our son had just been born in January, so he was 6 or 7 months old. I was on deployment in the Mediterranean. It was during the Cold War, and in the Mediterranean Sea was the 6th Fleet, the U.S. Navy, which generally had at least one U.S. Carrier, aircraft carrier, 2 cruisers, a fleet of about 28 ships. And the Russian fleet, because at that time they put a lot more money into their military budget than we did at the time. They had almost 56, almost 60 ships. And we would play a game of cat and mouse, and it was just, it wasn't funny. It was the Cold War. There were never any incidents while I was over there, although we were on a 370-foot oiler tanker that was innocuous. I mean, all we did was deliver oil and gas to amphibious ships. But we were tasked with putting on a spy, I'll call it a spy box. It was a big black box, probably about as big as half the size of this room. And it went smack in the middle of our deck plates where the oil and gasoline pipes were all lined up. And it made us look like an elephant with a wart on its back. I mean, it was like, well, what is that? Well, the Russians sort of knew what was going on. We were supposedly an innocent tanker. We had 2 guns, but they were pea shooters compared to what the Russians had. And there were 3 technician guys that served 8-hour watches, so they were on 24 hours a day listening and, quote, spying on the movement of Russian ships. I was on duty on what's called the dog watch, which was from 4 in the morning until 8 in the morning. And as dawn rose, we were near the boot of Sicily. I forget what that's officially called, the Bay of Medina, I think. But anyway, up on the horizon comes a Russian ship, and it's coming straight for us. And it's my job as officer of the deck to alert the captain. And so I called down and I said, "Captain, we've got a bogey." It was unidentified at the time, but we ultimately identified it as a Russian combatant. It was a cruiser. It was about twice as big as we were. And it came up, and they did these cat and mouse things all the time. They came up, and they were about 1,000 yards, which is a half of a nautical mile. It's like from here to the First Congo Church up here. It's not very far. And in the ocean, when you're moving along, it's not far at all. And the guy, the Russian I should say, hove to, which means he turned broadside to us. and you know, we're looking at him with binoculars, and he's looking at us, and he swings all of his guns, which was about 12 of them, and aimed them right at us. And I'm up on the deck, and well, let me just put it this way, I had to change my laundry. And the captain comes scrambling up. He hasn't shaved or anything, you know, it's 6 in the morning, and I know we're being taped, so I'll keep it clean. But he said, "My goodness, what's going on?" I said, "Well, we've got a Kirov class cruiser here that seems to want to get our attention." And he said, "No, just keep going." And I said, "Aye, aye, sir." And because we were heading, I don't know, due west, and this guy was coming down from the south. Nothing ever happened, but it really was a stark example of the level of, it's like playing chicken, you know, you're driving in a car and the guy's coming at you and whatever. There never really were any major incidents with the Russians in the Mediterranean Sea during that time frame. So people were kind of nervous and antsy about not just the Russians, but Korea and other, you know, communist countries. The only other incident I'll share with you is later that summer, late July, I think, we were in Naples, Italy, for 2 weeks of what they call R&R, rest and recreation. And it's as if both sides just sort of called a truce. The entire Sixth Fleet came into Naples. We had to anchor out because we were an oil and gas ship. And the Russians just kind of, you know, took a holiday because we weren't out, you know, cruising the Mediterranean. And prior to us coming into port, everybody in Naples, Italy, probably everybody in Italy knew, oh, the U.S. fleet's coming in, because all the tattoo parlors and the whorehouses and the bars and, you know, everything. Oh boy, here comes lots of U.S. dollars and thousands of U.S. sailors. My wife and the wife of our executive officer and the wife of our commanding officer were fortunate to be able to come over with another 247 wives who represented wives of officers on many of the ships that were in port in Naples during that time frame. And we were a small ship, just 7 officers and 77 enlisted men. But I was able to swap my duty time, because we were on what's called port and starboard, meaning you were on duty for 12 hours, you were off duty, and then you were on duty for another 12. So you were basically on the ship all the time. But I was able to swap so I could get into town, into Naples, and my wife had a hotel room, and we were able to go up to Rome and this kind of stuff. Anyway, we had top secret codes with our cryptology machine that enabled us to communicate with other ships when, you know, things were going to be pretty dicey. We never used them, but they were there, and it's a machine that back then, this is the early 70s, so we weren't nearly as technological as that tablet there, for example. We didn't have computers and stuff. We had paper key cards, for lack of a better word, and they were kept in a safe, and there was a protocol for how to pull them out, and 2 people had to read them, and this, that, and the other thing. Shorten the story, I mistakenly destroyed about 10 days worth of key cards for the 10 days coming up while we were both in port and going to be out at sea again. When I realized my mistake, I was frantic. Oh my God, I'm going to go to jail. I've really made a bad mistake. And I told my wife about it, and she said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I've got to go tell my commanding officer." So he was staying in the same hotel, and I went and knocked on his door, and he said, "Come on in." I met his wife, whatever, and I said, I have something to tell you that I think I need to say in private. And so she left, and I told him. And he was probably one of my first mentors, teacher, He was my commanding officer, I was his junior. But I was an important guy on the ship. I was the operations officer, basically the third in charge behind the executive officer. And he was upset, but he acknowledged that it was a mistake, an honest mistake. I wasn't a spy. I wasn't, you know, an undercover agent, whatever. And he somehow worked it out with the admiral or one of his buddies that if indeed a top secret message came out and it was broadcast by radio to all the ships, he would somehow find out what the message said. And it might have been something like get underway within 2 hours because we have to go to Cyprus or Crete or something to intercept a Russian, you know, fleet or something. Anyway, I thought back on that, particularly after having some sleepless hours last night, and I reminded my wife, and she said, "Oh yeah, you didn't sleep for like a week," I mean, because it was so. But I learned a lot from that. I mentioned earlier in our discussion attention to detail, and that among other things is an important aspect that I certainly learned from my service in the Navy. I've got a lot of other war stories, but I think you've got a limited time and looks like other people that need to be interviewed, but that's just sort of a quick story from many years ago.
Regardless, thank you, Mr. Jones. I really appreciate this, and your story will be kept, preserved and made accessible to the public, so that way people really don't forget what you and other veterans have gone through. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your efforts. Good luck with your, I understand this is an Eagle project
Indeed it is.
that you're doing, so good luck with your efforts and your buddies in the same troop.
Thank you.